Awesome. All right. I'm so excited to have the second session of the Behind the Surface series. Our guest speaker today is Laurie. Laurie has been a licensed school counselor for 19 years and is currently the 10th through 12th grade school counselor at Holly High School in Holly, Minnesota. She has experience working at the middle school and high school levels, in addition to some time spent working at an alternative school during her graduate program. Laurie earned a BA in honors psychology at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, and an MS in counseling psychology at St. Cloud State University. She was the 2007 West Central School Counselors Association Middle School Counselor of the Year and the 2008 Minnesota School Counselors Association Middle Junior High School Counselor of the Year. Laurie has 2 children of her own, an understanding husband, and a rescue dog that keeps them all on their toes. Laurie, I'm so excited to have this session with you. We'll just get rolling with the first question.
Okay.
How do you balance being a parent and a high school counselor?
Some days not very well. I'll just be honest. There are certainly days that my students at school get the best part of me, and my family at home gets what's left over, and that is not very healthy. But I think that's real and a common thing for a lot of full-time working parents. For me, I think it's a lot of knowing what my limits are to stay well. So, like, I need to leave work on time, and I can't bring a lot of work home with me. So that's what keeps me from getting burnt out and still trying to be a good parent. But it's also a curious thing because I am aware of things about my kids' friends and classmates. And so there's certainly an element of confidentiality that I just don't talk about a lot of my school stuff at home with my own kids because I can't. That just wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that balance of home life versus work life is really hard to achieve, and I know that for some people it takes a really, really long time. So already having that understanding of like, this is what I need to do at work, this is what I need to do at school, and obviously sometimes it isn't always going to be perfect, but just knowing that you're working at it all the time
Mhm.
is good. Yeah.
Mhm. And there are days when, because there's just some heavy stuff that I deal with. And so there are certainly days when I go home and I just tell my family, like, it was just like it was a really hard day. And so I'm sorry if I'm a little bit off, but I just need to be by myself tonight. And I think that open communication has helped them know, like, it's not you kids, it's just like there was just some stuff. And so
Yeah.
they don't know, but they kind of get what that means when I tell them that.
Yeah, and I imagine there are days where it's a lot because you're working with students that come from all different backgrounds and all different experiences, and sometimes the experiences are definitely different levels of trauma, and sometimes that can be really hard to digest, and then just kind of go about the rest of your day afterwards.
Right. Yep. Lots of practice, but there are
Yeah,
some things that they're just hard.
yeah, yeah. What challenges do you see parents facing in supporting their children's mental health during high school?
A couple of the biggest challenges are that one, like by high school kids' nature, they aren't always super open with their parents about stuff. They're just developmentally at a point where they want some autonomy and they want to figure it out themselves. So that's hard because then parents don't know, exactly what their kids are going through, just because they don't have the information. I think the other part that's really hard for parents is just it's hard to know what to do. And I think unless parents have a really solid background in mental health, those things are really tough to navigate. And honestly, even if they do have a good background in mental health, it's a different ball game when it's your own kid. Um,
Mhm.
so I think that those are a couple of the biggest things. We live in a rural community, so it's not like we're flush with resources. We're fortunate to have some, but it's also just hard sometimes to navigate the mental health system and get access to what your kids need. There's some big barriers out there to having adequate supports. And so that is, parents who are in the trenches with their own kids struggling with stuff. Gosh, that is really, really hard.
Yeah. And I was reading a little bit about it, but at least currently for rural areas, they're like 2 times as more likely to not have access to mental health care, or they're 2 times more as likely to at least have more than an hour commute just to get to one of those resources. So I think it's great that you are there to provide that resource for your students, but I'm sure that it's also difficult to be one of one of the only resources for such
Yeah.
a large pool of individuals.
Yeah. And it's tough because my specialty is working in the school, doing school counseling. And so I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, but I haven't had all of the hours working in like a clinical setting. And so I don't have as much expertise in those areas, but for families who are having a hard time, getting into a place or affording the co-pays and things like that, sometimes we're all that they have. And so that's hard because we don't want to like professionally stretch the boundaries of what we're able to do, but we also know sometimes like we're all families have, and
Yeah.
so we do the best we can to provide support, but it's hard when sometimes we see kids needing a higher level of care.
Yeah. And in your work, do you ever find yourself having to give advice to parents and stuff? Like, how do you kind of navigate um, being confidential about some of the things that the students share with you, but also if a parent kind of comes to you with questions? I guess I don't know how often parents do come to you with questions or concerns about their own children, but how do you kind of navigate staying confidential, but also trying to be helpful to parents as well?
Yeah. Fortunately, that's part of our training in school counseling. And I think other mental health professionals too have training on that. And what are kind of those guidelines for keeping confidentiality and when we have to break confidentiality. So in a nutshell, which is not black and white, but the times when we have to break confidentiality, regardless of what a student's wishes are, is that if the student tells us that they are planning to hurt themselves, or if they have a friend who's planning to hurt themselves, and that's generally defined as like being suicidal, but could also be other, significantly self-destructive behaviors.
Mhm.
If a student tells us that they are being harmed by somebody else, so if they're being abused by someone, if there's been a sexual assault that's occurred, or if likewise if they say if a friend of theirs is experiencing that, or if they tell us that they are planning to hurt somebody else. So like if a student says, I'm going to go, beat somebody up after school, like I can't keep that confidential. So
Yeah.
those are the guidelines that we follow. But it is tricky because there are some gray areas that ethically within the school counseling profession are really tricky. Like self-injury is a really common kind of ethical dilemma. Like at what point are we obligated to talk to parents about it, and at what point are we able to still keep that confidential? And that's a little bit of the art of it, and the judgment call of knowing the student and assessing the situation. But those things are really hard to do. So we try to be upfront with students about that whenever we're talking about um, kind of sticky issues that might be coming up. Um, that that we try to keep things confidential when we can. And if we have to break confidentiality, it's being upfront with the students. Like, I'm really worried about you, and this is why I need to let somebody know. And kids aren't always happy about that. But at some point, like, we have to keep parents in the loop so that they can keep an eye on their kid at home or get them connected with supports. And we do field calls from parents on a fairly regular basis. We get parents that reach out when they say, I don't know what to do. We get parents that reach out saying, I'm concerned about my kid. We get parents that, we have ongoing conversations with. They're just kind of touching base. So we actually do get a fair amount of communication from parents as well.
Okay. We'll move on to the next question. Um, can you share some common mental health concerns that you see high school students facing today?
Yeah, I think the most common one that we are seeing right now is anxiety. We're just seeing anxiety in high school kids like we have never, ever seen before. And when I talk with my colleagues in other schools and what I'm reading professionally, this is not uncommon to where we're at in Minnesota. This is nationwide stuff. And we are seeing, I would say in particular, quite a bit more like school avoidance because of anxiety than we've ever seen before, where kids are not wanting to come to school. As you can imagine, in a school setting, that presents some problems and also kind of gets us going in a spiral of like, well, if you're not here, then you get anxious about not being here. So then you avoid being here, which gets you anxious about not being here. And it's a really tough cycle to break. So that is certainly probably the most the most common one we're seeing. We certainly still are seeing kids that have depression too, in the upper Midwest, a good amount of seasonal depression, which maybe isn't diagnosed, but just in talking with kids who can tell like, yeah, I'm just not myself in the wintertime. So we're seeing some of that too. Those are probably the two biggest mental health conditions we're seeing right now in schools.
And would you say that just overall you're seeing a lot more, like a rise in a lot more different mental health conditions, or seeing a lot more students, maybe even just being more vocal about living with a mental health condition?
Mhm. Yeah, certainly. What do you say in my bio? Like 19 years I've been doing this. It's been a slow and steady increase in mental health incidents over the course of my school counseling career, and I would say in the last probably 5 years, a pretty significant increase in the rate that we're seeing more kids having mental health conditions. And I do think part of it is just as a culture, we're getting better about talking about it. So I think it's becoming more okay for kids to say, like, I am dealing with anxiety, or I am dealing with depression, or whatever their mental health condition is. But along with that, we are also starting to see that there is a increased severity in mental health, like kids having more life disrupting mental health conditions than what we used to see. I would say earlier in my career, I'd say one student maybe every few years who is really dealing with a significant mental health issue. And I would say now at any point there's a handful of kids in our building who are dealing with that. So that is it's tough because those are the kids that just need more support that it can sometimes be challenging for rural schools to support.
Yeah. And do you, along with that line of thinking, do you see that rise kind of being both a combination of one, people are more vocal about kind of talking about these things, and also do you think that it's also just because that's becoming more of a common thing for students, or I guess just anyone from any age to be living with a mental health condition?
Yeah, if I knew the answer to that, I would be doing a lot more than being a
Right.
guest on your on your program here, Whitney. I mean, my take on it is yes, I think it is some of each
Mhm,
that more kids are aware of it, more kids are talking about it. I think
mhm,
more kids are probably like self-diagnosing almost or self-identifying
mhm.
as that. But yeah, there certainly does seem to be more of like there just is more of it. And I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on where that is, which is really hard because it it's hard to know like, well, what do we do as a mental health community to try to address it better when we don't know the causes of it? How do we address it better? So I hope somebody out there is doing some good research and figuring it out, and we'll let the rest of us in the trenches know.
And I'm sure that's such a difficult question because it really just shows up so differently for every single person. Right? I mean, there's a list of, like, these are kind of the common signs of this mental health condition, but it really can manifest in just so many different ways that sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what it is and where some of that is coming from.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we also know that there are kids who just are never going to be comfortable talking about that at school or talking about that with their school counselors. And so we also don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And so there's likely a whole segment of kids out there that are struggling that maybe haven't named it as such or just don't want to talk about it with
Mm,
us. And so that also makes it harder for us to fully understand the scope of what's happening with kids' mental health in schools anyway.
yeah. I'm sure that definitely does add to that. How do you work with students to help manage the stress of academic pressure?
Mhm. It's a combination of like trying to help them find strategies, or I'll always tell kids like we're trying to help them find tools for their toolbox. So when they're stressed out, like what is it that you can do and trying to help them explore just a variety of different ways to just kind of manage the stress and cope with that. Because we know if they can figure out how to cope with some of that day-to-day stress of school, they're going to be better situated to deal with like the bigger life stressors that they are having. But also it's just trying to provide a space to talk with them kind of openly and honestly about it. For some kids, it's being that not that reality check, but just kind of being like a voice of reason. Like if you don't get 100% on your English test, you're going to be fine. Like let's just step back and help you look at this from a different perspective. So for some kids, it's giving them perspective. Some kids, it's helping them just try to look at the bigger picture. You know, like where do you want to go in life? Okay, if you want to be, you know, an electrician, in the grand scheme of things, maybe it doesn't matter how exactly you do, you know, in your biology class. But the important thing is we want to help you learn how to problem solve. So just helping them maybe change their mindset a little bit and think about it. But we also do a lot of just helping kids troubleshoot stuff. So if they're having a hard time in a certain class, maybe helping support them in how you talk to the teacher about that. If they're having a hard time studying, maybe it's helping them up with study techniques. So we're doing a lot of troubleshooting and trying to find some practical solutions, because we know if we can help figure out what's causing them stress, then hopefully they won't have as much stress down the line from their academics as well.
Yeah. So working in the Career Center, I see that other level of academic success in choosing what career path works for you. Because obviously, a lot of students after high school are like, oh, my next step is college. And, you know, there are obviously some that choose not to do that. But seeing students go from high school to college and then they get towards their senior year and they're really, you know, they really do stress about their career decision making. And do you have advice that you give to parents or that you give to students about their career exploration or like making that decision? Because that can be pretty hard.
Right. You know, we try to tell kids, like, just relax. Like, you're going to figure it out in your own time, and nobody's timeline looks the same. And like, we know there's a lot of like really good intention family members or community members or even teachers, I think, you know, educators in school that are asking kids, well, what do you want to do? Like, not intending to cause them more stress, but sometimes that does. So I try to tell kids, like, you're going to be okay. And even if you think you have it figured out, you're probably going to go to college and change your mind anyway. Or even if you know, don't want to go to college now and you want to get a job, you're probably going to change jobs down the line. We just know that's how it works. And so, you know, I always tell kids, like, you know, you need to spend some time thinking about what you want to do, you know, do some exploration, do some job shadowing, do some, you know, some Google searches of things that are interesting. It's good to kind of be proactive and at least starting to think about it. But also, like, don't get so wound up in it, which is hard because kids are having to make decisions about college in particular.
Yeah.
So, you know, I get that and I appreciate that. But I think the reality is that anybody who's been in the adult world for a while knows that, like, yeah, we have all changed our majors a lot, or we've changed careers, or we thought we were going to do something else and we aren't. When I talk to parents about it, I think, you know, the conversations I have with them is also like try to give your kid space. Like, your kid is going to be okay, because I do think there's pressure on parents too. If everybody else's kid knows what they're doing and mine doesn't, I think that's really hard. So I think it's for parents often, it's also just like, it's okay. Like, your kid's going to figure it out. But it's also easier said than done. Let's be
Right.
honest.
Yeah. Definitely. um, how do you think that mental health plays a role in that career decision making, especially for high school students? Because I think, again, I think it can be a little different for high school students versus college students. Because when you're in college, you do have at least a little bit of experience in the field that you think you want. But high school, you really don't always get that chance unless you have that job shadowing portion of your schooling.
Yeah. Yep. Like, I'll tell my students, like, you get to see as a high school kid, like, this much of the world. It's just what you happen to be exposed to in your community or family. And when you get to college, right, like, you know, there's like, oh, there's so many things or classes or like departments that you didn't even know you could take classes in when you were in high school. So it does change. I think kids who are struggling with their mental health oftentimes are also struggling with those big career choices and those big life transitions, because it's, if you're not feeling like you're centered and you're well and you have that clarity to think about what it is you want to do, it can be really hard to make good decisions, because you kind of need to have that self-awareness and that clarity to do that. I think for kids that are dealing with anxiety, the transition to college or career can be incredibly stressful, just because there's so much uncertainty out there. And so we're seeing those kids, I think, struggle more than the average student, because they're already in a pattern of kind of second guessing and worrying about things, and then to be faced with a huge life transition where it feels like if you pick the wrong path, you're going to mess up your life. Like, that's a lot of pressure for
Yeah.
someone who's already there. Having gone through it yourself, there's just a level of like confidence and being willing to get out there and try something new and get out of your comfort zone, that you need to have. And so when those are things you might struggle with anyway, that's a really challenging thing.
Yeah, and I know that for me, like it took me 4 tries to figure out what I wanted to do, because I started off wanting to be an animator, and then I was like, well, no, I want to be like a veterinarian, and then I was like, well, I'm going to go into education, and then I was like, nope, theater. So it really is such a all over the place kind of journey, and I think that's something that's really hard to grasp sometimes, because you're like, no, this is exactly how I want my path to go, and it's like, well, your path might go here and then all the way over here and all the way up here, so it's really just a matter of having an element of trust, and also that element of like planning. You kind of want to have almost just like a right in the middle, like being able to like, these are my goals, but also if it doesn't happen, that's okay, because maybe that's just wasn't what was in the cards.
Mm-hmm.
That can be hard to accept.
Yeah. Yep. And I think for a lot of high school kids who, just haven't been out in the world on their own, to know that life is going to throw you off,
Mhm.
take you on some detours along the way. Like, if you want it to be kind of a straight, direct path from, high school to dream job, that's a tough thing to even think like, oh, what, it might not go according to plan. So,
Yeah,
and
true.
also, I think that in high school anyway, I don't think kids always hear a lot from people that have had kind of a long, windy journey. Like, I think the stories that kids hear more often is like, oh, well, I went to, you know, college and I got this degree and now I have this great job, or I went right into the workforce and I got this great job. Like, they don't hear as much about the kids that were like, oh, I actually like failed out of college the first semester and then worked for a while and then figured out what I wanted to do and go back. Because those stories sometimes are a little bit more humbling to share. And so I think we are trying to find opportunities to bring those stories in to kids more, to say like, no, it's not all just point A to point B in a straight line. Like, let's hear from some alumni or for some people that have had a longer, windier, like more realistic, I think, path.
Yeah, and I think the one good thing is, at least from the collegiate perspective, is I'm seeing a lot more, at least Concordia has had a lot more speakers who are of that experience of where it wasn't exactly linear. It wasn't like point A to point B to point C right away. And I think it's really good to have those experiences and have those stories told, so that people can go, oh, okay, so maybe where I'm at right now is okay, even if it's not where I want to be. Someday I'll get to where I want to be, and maybe my goals will change at that point, but it is okay. And again, that's something that can be pretty hard to accept, for sure. Yeah. Can you share a success story of how mental health awareness positively impacted a student's career journey?
Hmm. This is a tough question, just because I worked with a lot of kids over the
Yeah.
over the years.
Right.
Um, I think when I think back about some of the kids that I've had the honor of working with in high school that have really just had some tough journeys with mental health, but that kind of came out, on the other side of it before they graduated. And by that, I just mean like they were able to kind of figure out what was going on and get some help and start to be able to move through the process of being healthier and taking care of their mental health better. Um, I've had a couple of kids I can think of that as they kind of figured it out, it was sort of like the cloud and the fog lifted from them, and they were able to say, okay, well, I aspired to go on to this, whatever this next thing was. For these kids, it was like a 4-year college. And I didn't ever think I'd be able to do that, but now I think I can. And so I think, sorry, Whitney.
That was good.
I think that those stories have been some of the most rewarding ones, just because to be able to sit along and walk with kids that are going through the journey of just kind of figuring out like what's going on with them and how to be healthier and how to heal from some of the stuff they've been through. And to see them be able to come out and like, you guys are going to be okay. Like you healed well enough while you were in high school, or figured it out enough to be able to like navigate that college process and to be able to go on to whatever that variety of paths was. Yeah. We don't always get to see that, at that
Right.
thing.
And it's great to see that there are students who are getting that help and jumping through that difficult time in such an early stage in their life, especially being able to walk away and having some of those tools to help themselves once you get to college, because it's such a different thing, because you're going to have to start thinking about like, oh, do I have a job that like pays the bills, and like, can I manage my classes in a completely different setting? And there's a lot of self-reliance in those situations, and being able to have those tools before you get to that stage can be such a game changer.
Yeah, that's our hope. If it works out well, that's
Yes.
what we hope for.
um, so how do you strike a balance between addressing academic goals and also supporting students' emotional needs?
The curious thing about that is they're so often really closely intertwined, because it's really pretty common that if I talk with a student who is struggling academically, there's a reason for that. And oftentimes that's going to be mental health related stuff, but it might just be stuff going on at home or life choices that they're making. And so I think like in working with individual students, they really are so much more often intertwined than we would think, which is not, it shouldn't be a surprise. That I think it's a common sense, like kids that are struggling in other areas of their life are going to have a harder time in school. I think as far as the work that we do as school counselors and more of the proactive stuff, I think that is the harder part to do, because it can be challenging at times to do good quality mental health education and social emotional learning with high school kids, because sometimes they just aren't really into learning about that or talking about that stuff in school in a way that's engaging. It doesn't seem like lecture-y or boring.
Right.
And the reality is, like in my job, there's different aspects of my job, and the parts that are academic tend to be more time sensitive. And so sometimes that just is the stuff that gets more focused because it has to get done, right? Like a scholarship deadline comes, so we have to make sure that gets done by then. And so I think over the course of any given school year, there's kind of an ebb and flow as to what we're focusing on at a certain time. But I think there is certainly more that I could be doing or would like to be doing to help support kids with their mental health and have those conversations. But it's also tough to not have time to do it all.
Yeah. Yeah. That can be a difficult thing to balance, I'm sure. Yeah. Are there specific resources or programs that you find helpful when promoting both academic and emotional health for students or for parents?
Yeah. Yep. Resources or programs. There's a couple of programs that we use in the school, whether it's curriculum wise or kind of a group. One of the things that we're working on getting up and running is a program called Sources of Strength. We actually have we're part of a grant in our county that got it from the state for suicide prevention. And we tried it last year and it didn't go quite as well as we thought. So we're trying to revamp it, but we keep getting our trainings delayed because of weather and sickness and all kinds of things that are out of our control. But what the program is about, it's really a strengths-based resiliency program, where a smaller group of kids are trained on being able to identify that you have strengths in all different areas of your life, and that when things are hard, like you can kind of lean on those strength areas to get through. And the goal is to not only train these kids, but then they go on to do kind of building-wide campaigns to try to spread the word or teach other kids about it. And so they might do a campaign about, who is your mentor and why is that person important to you, to help show like you've got adults in your life that are by your side, or how do you manage stress. So that's an initiative that we are working on getting up and running again in collaboration with Reach, which is a local kind of social service agency or nonprofit. So I think that will be a helpful thing for us at the school. We have used parts of the Ramp Up to Readiness program here for the last number of years. That is a program developed by the University of Minnesota. It's a curriculum, but there's pieces of it in grades 7 through 12 here that's really designed to like just help kids be better informed about their options after high school, whether it's the college route or different career paths or things like that. But there's also a good amount of just like how do you succeed academically? How do you set goals? How do you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish? So for us, those have been a couple good programs. We are fortunate in our school to have a school-based mental health program. So we partner with an area mental health providing agency, and they actually have a provider who's in the school a couple days a week. They aren't employed by the school. It's just kind of like we're sharing our space with them so that families don't have to travel like into the Fargo-Moorhead or Detroit Lakes areas to get counseling support. That has been just a fantastic program. I think right now our provider is full because that's how many kids are seeing her. So that has been, as far as the specific mental health piece of things, has been a really, really helpful program for us to have. And I think more schools are starting to incorporate that because it works really well for families.
Yeah, especially taking in the factor of, at least living in the Midwest or a place where it snows so many months out of the year, that having that resource that's just right across the street sort of a thing, instead of having to go all the way to Fargo and then going, oh, am I going to make it home, or do I have to leave early? Can I even make it? Who knows? Because the weather is extremely unpredictable, especially this year.
Yep. Yep. And what we are finding is that, if a student has to travel to a larger community for a counseling appointment, they're missing half a day of school for it, which is a burden on parents because they have to take off of work. They have to, pay for gas money to get up there. And then the kid is missing half a day of school, which really is not ideal. And so by having it at the school, the provider is able to see a student out of one of their class periods and usually tries to pick one that's a little easier for them to miss. And so not only is the parent not having to miss work, but the student is also just missing one class period versus 4 of them. And that's a really, really big deal for kids and families and for trying to get an education as well.
Right. Yeah, especially if you have to balance all those things. It's great to just have that resource. How do you think that parents can collaborate with high school counselors to better support their children's mental health?
I think just communicate with us. We're a resource in the school that's able to be the connector between the different teachers and between parents. But if we don't know, it's hard for us to kind of be those eyes and ears for kids. And I think sometimes people think like, oh, the school's just trying to get into my private business, and that's not it at all. Like it, I don't care what your family is doing outside of the school day, but if what's happening outside of the school day is starting to impact the child during the school day, maybe there's some things we can do to support them. And oftentimes kids are really good at wearing that mask of everything is okay at school, so we don't even realize how much they're struggling. And a parent reaching out to kind of clue us in can be really helpful, because again, we may have no idea that a student is super stressed out at school because they look like they're just fine, even though they're just falling apart on the inside. we can serve as kind of troubleshooters for parents. So we'll field calls from parents who are like, I just don't even know what to do. So we can try to kick around some options with them. We can serve as communicators between parents and teachers. So we do a lot of just kind of information sharing, like, hey, teachers, heads up, like, you know, so-and-so student is having a rough time. Just kind of keep an eye on them. And we work with families a lot to be able to say, like, how much is okay to share and how much is not okay? Because, I think school staff do not need to know every single detail of what's going on. Just that they know, like, yeah, the student is really struggling right now is oftentimes enough for teachers to say, okay, well, we'll give them some grace, or maybe we'll respond to them differently than we would have. Now we know, like, they're not just a disengaged student. There's something big going on. And we are always a resource to touch base with kids. I've got parents that'll reach out and say, hey, my child's really struggling. Do you have time to see them today? So we can do that as well.
Yeah, and I think communication, I mean, at least with all the different trainings and courses that I've taken, that really just is the number one thing that stands out to me, is being able to communicate. And I think it's difficult for high school students because they're still in that world of, I'm learning how to communicate, I'm learning how to communicate healthily, and sometimes I don't really think about communicating my own needs versus something academic or what have you. But I think that's just something that we also take for granted, the ability to communicate and communicate well. And I think that's a conversation that's starting to be more often or reoccurring, is like communication is so important, and that's something that we all can work on all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And I know we've had families that have reached out that are concerned, like, well, if they tell me something, is the whole school going to know about it? And we're professionals. So it's not like if you call me, Whitney, and say, oh, here's what's going on in my house, I'm not going to run to the teacher's lounge and tell everybody about that stuff. Like, that is, again, like, we really aren't interested in knowing all the details of what's going on in your household. And so if there are things that parents are wanting us to have on our radar, but are just really concerned about the privacy, it's also okay to say, like, please don't tell anybody else about this. I've had parents that have asked that, and I'm happy to oblige. It can also be a connector to resources too, because sometimes we're aware of just community resources or maybe mental health agencies that have openings or might be a good fit for kids. So we can also function in that way, that if parents aren't really sure what to do or where to go next, that we sometimes are able to offer some suggestions too for how to navigate just the world of mental health, in addition to college and all the other things that we do.
Yeah. From your perspective, what trends or challenges do you notice or observe in the mental health landscape of high school students?
Like I mentioned before, that anxiety piece is a huge increasing trend. And I think post-COVID, in particular, I think that kind of exacerbated, like, things we were already seeing, that it just seemed to, like, increase much more. That school avoidance piece has really, really become a big thing for schools across the country in education, literature and trainings. That is just such a big piece that schools are having a hard time figuring out why kids aren't coming to school and how to make it easier for kids to come to school. I think we are seeing kids who are becoming more open and talking about how they are doing, but I think they're having a harder time differentiating between, like, I'm feeling anxious versus what we would call, like, clinical anxiety. So I think that is a trend that we didn't really expect. Like, we're talking about how we're feeling more, but just because you're feeling anxious because you have a test coming up doesn't mean you have test anxiety. So those are some things. Social media sure is having a curious impact on how kids navigate their world. And I am not convinced that there isn't some pretty big mental health impacts that are coming off of that. Again, it'll be interesting in 20 years what the research says about it. But I do think that is something that is really impacting our kids more than we realize.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think, I feel like social media is kind of like popped up and we all were really invested in it, but I don't think there was enough talk about how do you curate your own social media to maybe not see as much of the negativity, or how do you recognize that, the people that are on the other side of the screen are also just as human as you are, and sometimes there's that it really kind of removes that humanity sometimes with how
Mhm.
quick you can respond to things. And I would agree. I'm curious to see what what that research is going to look like when the next update kind of shows up.
Yeah, yep. And I think we're seeing that um, that kids aren't getting a chance to take a break from being plugged into the social fabric of their worlds either.
Right.
They are, if something bad happens at school, it's not like you just leave school and you can walk away from it. That
Right.
carries on through whatever social media interactions you're having with your peers, or likewise things that are happening outside of school or happening on social media starts influencing what happens in school. And so it's hard for kids to just get a break from having to be on
Yeah.
all the time with their peers. And I think that is a really, really difficult thing to not ever have just kind of that downtime where you can just be at home and do your thing and not have to worry about who's watching or who's,
Yeah.
having an opinion on what you're doing.
Yeah.
I do think that we're seeing kids that are wanting to know more about mental health and are wanting to know more about how to have better mental health.
Mhm.
So I think that is a really positive thing that kids get. Like this is a kind of a big deal and is an important thing to be able to figure out and to help their friends out with too. So it's not like it's all doom and gloom. I think there's some really positive things on the mental health landscape as well.
Yeah, it definitely comes with some ups and downs for sure.
Mhm. Yep.
I guess staying along the line of the mental health landscape, how do you see how it has evolved? And obviously, we talked a little bit about how social media has kind of impacted that, and what improvements do you see, and maybe some what changes would you like to see in the future?
Yeah, I would love a magic wand where it could just make everything be better and make it easier for kids and to help us better understand what's going on. Really, I truly do look forward to the day when there's just a little better understanding of what causes people to have mental illnesses.
Mhm.
And how do we effectively treat them. I think the field of psychology and understanding how that what is actually going on in the brain is just so young, and it would be really nice if people just were able to know what happened and have access to a medication or a treatment that they just knew was going to be very effective for whatever it was they're dealing with. That's a really hard part.
Yeah.
uh, I would like there to be kind of a continued openness or acceptance of like it's okay to not be okay, but also that realization like, but if you're not okay, like you got to do something about it. It's not
Mhm.
just like I don't have that magic wand that just makes it go away. And I think depending where you're at in the country, I think in the upper Midwest, we're kind of stoic and we just take care of our stuff and
Mhm.
we don't need help doing it, and that doesn't always serve us really well.
Right.
So I would hope that there will be kind of a continued openness to like, let's like, I can tell you how I'm really doing, and it's not going to be a bad thing for me to to have that
Right.
conversation.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think we will continue to see um, more community-based supports like in schools. I think there's some really nice partnerships that are happening, and I hope that that can continue because I think that has made it really easy for families to get help, and schools are just where all the kids are at. So I think that's a really natural fit. I hope people keep talking about mental health,
Mhm.
um, but I don't know. It can't get better fast enough. I see a lot of kids that are struggling,
Yeah.
and I wish that they would not have to feel like they're alone in
Mhm.
it. They're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree that I hope that the conversation continues for a long time, because I feel like there is more conversation about mental health, and I would like to see that rise just keep going up and up
Mhm,
because
mhm,
it is really important to talk about, and it is okay to not be okay, but like you said, it's also really important to recognize that and then go, okay, what do I need to do so that I can be okay?
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. Yep. And I think there's been a good recognition like at the state level, at the state legislative levels, which is kind of where policy and money are coming from to help fund these efforts and to prioritize these initiatives. I think there's been an increased recognition that there's pretty significant mental health challenges out there that are really impacting communities. And I'm optimistic that there will be some changes made so that there can be better access to all different levels of care. Like there are just some levels of care that are really really tough to come by. You know, there's not always enough hospital beds for people that are really having significant struggles. And that is a huge, huge issue for families that are really dealing with kids who are really, really unwell. Um, so it's my hope that there will continue to be attention by the folks that have the power to make changes to really identify where those gaps in the system are and how to fix them. There's good conversations happening out there in the mental health community, but boy, sometimes it takes some money and policy change
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And a little bit of time and crossing your fingers and hoping that it works out.
Yeah, exactly right. But in the trenches, we'll keep plugging along and doing the best we
Yeah. Well, that was the last question that I had. I want to thank you for taking the time to deal with all the technical problems going on with a lot of the Google Meets and Zoom stuff. We love technology, but I think this was a really great conversation, and I'm excited to share this with everyone else.
can. Yeah. Thank you so much, Whitney, for telling these stories. And I hope that you are able um, to really spread the word about all the good things that you're trying to help people learn about and just be okay with. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. We will both work to keep the conversation going for sure.
That's a really good plan.